There's a lot of Mardi Gras history here along St. Charles Avenue. Even these old streetcars are part of that history. But more about that in just a moment. First, let's tell you exactly where we are. St. Charles Avenue at 3rd Street, right across from one of the historic old white column mansions where many a family has watched many a Mardi Gras over the years. But this is 1991, hence this yellow ribbon wrapped around this old oak tree. But aside from that, very little has changed over the years that people have been watching Mardi Gras parades from this raised balcony. But instead of 1991, let us say it is 1926. We picked that year because we have some remarkable home movies made that year from this very spot as Rex passed by that year. And if we can switch back to those pictures from 1926, you'll see that everything was exactly the same. Almost, except for one important difference. Those floats are being drawn by mules. Mules had been used from the dawn of Carnival in 1857. And even though automobiles had become fairly common by 1926, no one used this form of propulsion to pull a float until 1950. By the way, notice that the streetcars of 1926 were the same ones in use today. Rex stopped at this house because it was owned by Rex of 1907, lumberman Robert Downman, for whom Downman Road is named. The home was built in 1880 and is still owned by his family. Today, the crew of Sparta is the only one that still uses mules to pull the King's float. But unlike a tractor, you have to talk to this form of transportation. Rex used mules in 1972 for its 100th anniversary parade, and a few others have used them off and on in recent years. But only Sparta still does after bringing them back for their King's float 10 years ago. So now it's tractor time. Acres and acres of tractors in a storage area on the West Bank, where they're kept in good repair for this 2-week frenzy of activity every year at Carnival time. It's a full-time job for Jim Tabor, who runs the tractor business for the Blaine Kern organization, which actually owns these tractors. Kern himself made a deal with the Russians for their workhorse Belarus tractors.
Presently, we have 117 Belarus tractors prior to the Soviet Union, and we've been pulling Mardi Gras with them for 10 years now.
What made Blaine Kern decide to go red instead of red, white, blue?
Purely economics. A very good product for a very low price, a true American tradition.
It's a hands-on job for Tabor, rolling out a 400-pound wheel to add to the back axle of a tractor that'll have an especially big load to pull. Some jobs just can't be handled without that extra tire on the back. And sometimes, just for the extra weight, the back tires are filled with water instead of air to provide the balance and the traction for some of those bigger floats. Before every parade, the diesel generators are checked out to make sure they can deliver the power needed for the lights and the animation now used in so many parades. Blaine Kern and Jim Tabor keep in constant touch during Carnival to make sure everything's in good order.
All right. These will be rolling in a little bit.
Well, great.
The tractors are all diesel, Kern says, to reduce the fire hazard of gasoline engines. But the biggest hazard of all was political when he bought the tractors. You know, when you first made the decision to go Russian tractors instead of American tractors, you sure took a lot of flack, didn't you?
Oh, gosh, yeah, because they said, Blaine, you're a communist. And yeah, I'm World War II veteran, and my gosh. Yeah, but, you know, I've always believed in building bridges and doing business with people. If you do business with people, like, you can't fight with them, that's for sure.
So as you're watching those floats go by, remember, there's a pretty good show of the tractors, just as there is in the parades. Alan Gifford, 6 News. For as long as there has been a Mardi Gras in New Orleans, these Flambeaux torches have been lighting up the night. And the men who carry them were a show of their own. In 1857, when Comas launched the very first parade, remember, theirs is always at night, it was an obvious necessity in the pre-electric light age. Rex, of course, never needed his guys. His is a daylight parade. Here is a picture few people get to see, unless, of course, they know exactly where and when to go to watch 67-year-old Frank Lazard, the Flambeaux boss, carry the master torch that lights all of the others. Lazard's been doing this for the past 43 years. And if any spill should catch fire, there's a safety crew on hand to snuff it out. But Frank Lazard's day starts much earlier, in a building a few blocks away. And this is where it all begins, in the Comus Den at Bordeaux and Annunciation Street, where hundreds of these torches are stored. They're kept in good repair, and every night before the parade, they're filled with kerosene. The torches, 80 of them for each parade, are loaded aboard an ancient wagon after having been filled with enough kerosene to keep them burning for at least 2 hours. Lazard makes sure they're all tied securely in place for the half-mile journey to the parade assembly area at St. Charles and Napoleon, where the Flambeaux carriers also assemble, police permits in hand, to be hired on the spot. How do you find all the people for this?
Well, you don't have to find them. All they got to know is Mardi Gras. In the parades, and they're there. The fellas, they come there. You don't have to tell nobody. You don't have to tell them anything. All they got to know is a parade, and they're there.
And so is Frank Lazard, lighting the torches for the night. A few years ago, this age-old tradition was very nearly sacrificed on the altar of civil rights by well-meaning people who felt it was somehow demeaning to the Flambeaux carriers, most of whom are black, who make very little money, and must stay around at the end of each parade to wait for the paymaster to hand them in cash the little they do make. But for Lazard, there's a dignity in all of this, and no Flambeaux carrier has ever told him he doesn't want the job. If these men are unhappy, they sure have him fooled. Alec Gifford, 6 News.